Hi guys, this is Miss Ringer. I'm so excited to be reading to you guys today. I miss you a lot and I hope you're doing great at home. I'm going to read in Charlotte's Web, chapter 14, starting on page 105. I'll give you a minute to get there, but the title of this chapter is Dr. Dorian. Page 105. Here we go. The next day was Saturday. Fern stood at the kitchen sink, drying the breakfast dishes as her mother washed them. Mrs. Arble worked silently. She hoped Fern would go out and play with the other children instead of heading for the Zuckerman's barn to sit and watch animals. Charlotte is the best storyteller I ever heard, said Fern, poking her dish towel into a cereal bowl. Fern, said her mother sternly, you must not invent things. You know spiders don't tell stories. Spiders can't talk. Charlotte can, replied Fern. She doesn't talk very loud, but she talks. What kind of story did she tell? Asked Mrs. Arble. Well, Fern began, she told us about a cousin of hers who caught a fish in her web. And don't you think that's fascinating? Fern, dear, how would a fish get into a spider's web? Said Mrs. Arble. You know it couldn't happen. You're making this up. Oh, it happened all right, replied Fern. Charlotte never fibs. Fib. What do you think fib means? It says Charlotte never fibs. I think here it means that she never lies or tells a story. Charlotte never fibs. This cousin of hers built a web across the stream. One day she was hanging around on the web and a tiny fish leaped into the air and got tangled in the web. The fish was caught by one fin. Mother, its tail was wildly thrashing and shining in the sun. Can't you just see the web sagging dangerously under the weight of the fish? Charlotte's cousin kept slipping in, dodging out, and she was beaten mercilessly over the head by the wildly thrashing fish, dancing in, dancing out, throwing... Fern, snapped her mother, stop it. Stop inventing these wild tales. I'm not inventing, said Fern. I'm just telling you the facts. Well, what finally happened? Asked her mother, whose curiosity began to get the better of her. Well, Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up, then she ate him. When she got, Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up, and she ate him when she got good and ready. Spiders have to eat, the same as the rest of us. Yes, I suppose they do, said Mrs. Arble vaguely. Charlotte has another cousin who is a balloonist. She stands on her head, lets out lots of line, and is carried aloft on the wind. Mother, wouldn't you simply love to do that? Yes, I would, come to think of it, replied Mrs. Arble. But, Fern, darling, I wish you would play outdoors instead of going to Uncle Homer's barn. Find some of your playmates to do something nice outdoors. You're spending too much time in that barn. It isn't good for you to be alone so much. Alone? Said Fern. Alone? My best friends are in the barn cellar. It's a very sociable place, not at all lonely. Fern disappeared after a while, walking down the road toward Zuckerman's. Her mother dusted the sitting room. As she worked, she kept thinking about Fern. It didn't seem natural for a little girl to be so interested in animals. Finally, Mrs. Arble made up her mind she would pay a call on old Dr. Dorian and ask his advice. She got in the car and drove to his office in the village. Dr. Dorian had a thick beard. Ooh, I want you guys to imagine what Dr. Dorian looks like. Dr. Dorian had a thick beard. He was glad to see Mrs. Arble and gave her a comfortable chair. I can kind of see in my mind this whole scene playing out where her mom's visiting the doctor and he's an old man and he's got a beard and she's sitting in this comfortable chair. It's about Fern, she explained. Fern spends entirely too much time in the Zuckerman's barn. It doesn't seem normal. She sits on a milk stool in a corner of the barn cellar near the pig pen and watches animals hour after hour. She just sits and listens. Dr. Dorian leaned back and closed his eyes. How enchanting, he said. It must be real nice and quiet down there. Homer has some sheep, hasn't he? Yes, said Mrs. Arble, but it all started with that pig we let Fern raise on a bottle. She calls him Wilbur. Homer bought the pig, and ever since it left our place, Fern has been going to her uncle's barn to be near it. I've been hearing things about that pig, said Dr. Dorian, opening his eyes. They say he's quite a pig. Have you heard about the words that appear in the spider's web? Asked Mrs. Arble nervously. Yes, replied the doctor. Well, do you understand it? Asked Mrs. Arble. Understand what? Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web? Oh, no, said Dr. Dorian. I don't understand it, but for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle. But nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. What's miraculous about a spider's web? Said Mrs. Arble. I don't see why you say a web is a miracle. It's just a web. Ever try to spin one? Asked Dr. Dorian. Mrs. Arble shifted uneasily in her chair. No, she replied, but I can crochet a doily and I can knit a sock. A doily. Oh, you know what? A doily is one of those like fancy lace things that sometimes people will put on like a side table or put it underneath like a fancy plate. You'll see them a lot at like Valentine's Day and that sort of thing, but that's what a doily is. Mrs. Arble shifted uneasily in her chair. No, she replied, but I can crochet a doily and I can knit a sock. Well, sure, said the doctor, but somebody taught you, didn't they? Well, my mother taught me. Well, who taught that spider? A young spider knows how to spin a web without any instruction from anybody. Don't you regard that as a miracle? I suppose so, said Mrs. Arble. I never looked at it that way before. Still, I don't understand how those words get into the web. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I can't understand. Let me reread that line. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I can't understand. None of us do, said Dr. Dorian, sighing. I'm only a doctor. Doctors are supposed to understand everything. But I don't understand everything, and I don't intend to let it worry me. Mrs. Arble fidgeted. You know what fidgeted means? That makes me think of fidget spinners that used to be really popular. Fidgeting means that she just kind of shifts in her chair a little bit. She fidgets. Mrs. Arble fidgeted. Fern says the animals talk to each other. Dr. Dorian, do you believe animals talk? I never heard one say anything, he replied, but that proves nothing. It is quite possible that an animal has spoken civilly to me and that I didn't catch the remark because I wasn't paying attention. Children pay attention better than grown-ups. If Fern says that the animals in Zuckerman's barn talk, I'm quite ready to believe her. Perhaps if people talked less, animals would talk more. People are incessant talkers. I can give you my word on that. Incessant. I wonder what that word means. Well, I feel better about Fern, said Mrs. Arble. You don't think I need to worry about her? Does she look well? Asked the doctor. Oh, yes. Appetite good? Oh, yes, she's always hungry. Sleep well at night? Oh, yes. Then don't worry, said the doctor. Do you think she'll ever start thinking about something besides pigs and sheep and geese and spiders? How old is Fern? Well, she's 8. Well, said Dr. Dorian, I think she will always love animals, but I doubt that she spends her entire life in Homer Zuckerman's barn cellar. How about boys? Does she know any boys? Well, she knows Henry Fussy, said Mrs. Arble brightly. Dr. Dorian closed his eyes again and went into deep thought. Henry Fussy, he mumbled. Remarkable. Well, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Let Fern associate with her friend. What does associate mean? Let Fern associate with her friends in the barn if she wants to. I think that means to associate. I think that means to like hang out. I would say offhand that spiders and pigs are fully as interesting as Henry Fussy. Yet I predict that the day will come when even Henry will drop some chance remark that catches Fern's attention. It's amazing how children change from year to year. How's Avery? He asked, opening his eyes wide. Oh, Avery, chuckled Miss Arble. Avery is always fine. Of course, he gets into poison ivy and gets stung by wasps and bees and brings frogs and snakes home and breaks everything he lays his hands on. He's fine. Good, said the doctor. Mrs. Arble said goodbye and thanked Dr. Dorian very much for his advice. She felt greatly relieved.